What do you think a knight's armor smelled like? Most people probably don't give much thought to the olfactory side of medieval knights. We all know about their shiny armor and noble deeds, right? Well, a new study says we should think again. A team of historians and scientists have teamed up to get to the bottom of what a knight's armor smelled like based on a bunch of historical accounts and science experiments. The results? Stinky. According to researchers, a knight's armor smelled like sweat, stale urine, rotten eggs, dirty socks, and old blood. This image of medieval knights covered in unpleasantness is quite a contrast to the usual portrayal of these armored warriors as heroic and shining examples of bravery. So, what is the reason behind the not-so-sweet smell? What makes a knight's armor smell so bad? Well, it has to do with how knights were made to withstand physical strain and danger on a daily basis. They needed to be dressed in several layers of armor, including a coat of mail made of thousands of tiny metal rings. Underneath this, they wore a padded jacket called a buff, as well as a sturdy leather jerkin. Additionally, knights wore a variety of defensive headgear, gloves, and footwear to protect their entire body from harm. The trouble was this bulky armor did not come with any ventilation. This meant that knights were basically cooking inside their metal suits. As they moved around, their bodies would sweat profusely, which led to the growth of bacteria and fungi that created some pretty foul smells. For example, the armpits could get so wet that the knight's armpit hair would start to rot. And let's not forget the toilet situation back then. Public restrooms were rare and far between, especially during medieval times. Tournaments and battles could go on for days without any facilities nearby, leaving knights with no choice but to relieve themselves wherever they had to. Urine was often used for cleaning purposes, so it wouldn't be surprising to find some in a knight's armor. Also, the decaying flesh of fallen animals and the blood of slain knights could easily linger on a knight's armor after a battle. 2. Knights ate hearty food. Another factor contributing to the pungent aroma of a knight's armor was their diet. Medieval knights typically ate lots of meat, cheese, and other high-protein foods that produce a lot of waste. While these foods were necessary to fuel the knight's active lifestyle, they were not exactly known for their pleasant smell. Once again, the lack of proper sanitation in medieval times meant that the waste from these meals would stay put in the knight's armor until it started to smell. 3. Knights didn't bathe regularly. This is a bit of a touchy subject. Back in the Middle Ages, cleanliness was not really a priority for most people, including knights. They viewed bathing too often as a sign of weakness, and they were afraid that frequent washing would make them more susceptible to illnesses. Plus, water was scarce in many parts of medieval Europe, so knights were not exactly eager to use it for hygiene purposes. And let's be honest, scrubbing the armor by hand was not really an option. This lack of hygiene meant that the bacteria and other microorganisms had free rein on a knight's body, leading to some pretty stinky situations. 4. Armor was expensive and impractical to clean. Knights spent a lot of money on their armor, and it was considered a symbol of their status and wealth. Overall, the combination of practicality, expense, and mindset made it difficult for knights to keep their armor clean during medieval times. However, this lack of hygiene contributed to the unpleasant smell that permeated their armor and became a defining characteristic of medieval warfare and tournaments. Now, it's time to delve into the cesspools of medieval history and learn about the unsanitary conditions that made these armored warriors stink worse than a gym locker room. So buckle up and get ready for a journey through the filthy underbelly of medieval life. 1. Rusty can openers. Yeah, you heard that right. During medieval times, weapons were not the only things getting rusty. Can you imagine a knight trying to open his cans of Hormel chili with a rusted can opener? These massive metal contraptions were primarily used to open wooden barrels, which were commonly used to store food and liquids. But the problem was that these weren't exactly the cleanest things around. The same barrels that held delicious ale and fresh water also housed everything else from chamber pots to dead animals. The result? Well, just imagine the smell. Now, don't get us wrong, we're not suggesting that medieval knights were eating crow and dog food straight from the barrel, but the unsanitary conditions made it difficult to ensure that the food and supplies stored in these barrels were completely safe for consumption. It was a risky game of chance, a gamble with hygiene and health. Eating from a rusty can opener might have been a real possibility for medieval knights. They definitely weren't munching on $5 steaks, that's for sure. Now, if you've ever tried opening a can with a rusty key, you know it's not only incredibly difficult, but also potentially dangerous. The sharp edges of the rusty tool can easily cut your fingers, leaving you with nasty wounds that are susceptible to infection. And let's be real, the last thing a knight wants to deal with is a cut finger. When you're fighting in the middle of a battle, it's not exactly convenient to have your hand wrapped up in bandages. But that was the risk medieval knights took every time they put a rusty can opener to their lips. And if that doesn't sound gross enough, consider this: the can openers were often shared among the knights. You heard that right. They passed around their germ-infested weapons like it was a game of hot potato. The unsanitary conditions and lack of hygiene in medieval times meant that these can openers became a breeding ground for bacteria and diseases. Sharing them around was like playing a real-life game of musical chairs, except instead of a chair, it was a rusty can opener, and instead of musical chairs, it was a death sentence. If you managed to survive the cut fingers and bacterial infections, you still had to deal with the smell. Rusty can openers don't exactly have the most delicious aroma. Just think about the metallic tang of old blood mixed with the earthy scent of decomposing waste. Yikes! Despite the danger, the inconvenience, and the absolutely horrendous smell, medieval knights kept using these rusty can openers. After all, they weren't exactly known for their culinary skills or their appreciation for hygiene. Plus, it's not like they had access to fancy kitchen gadgets like the rest of us. So I guess it's not that surprising that they made do with what they had, even if that meant eating from rusty, disease-ridden can openers. As you can see, medieval knights were not the shining heroes we often portray them to be. Their armor was a cesspool of bacteria, dirt, and other unsavory substances that would make even the most seasoned knight cringe. Now it's time for you to take a deep breath and try not to gag as you imagine yourself sharing a meal with these foul-smelling warriors. Just remember, they weren't exactly known for their table manners either. So grab your fork and shield yourself against the stench of medieval dining.